The wind howled like a wild beast, tearing through the valley with a force that could knock a man off his feet. Dark clouds rolled above, thick and heavy, their bellies flashing with white and purple light. Thunder cracked so loud it shook the ground. And then came the rain, not water, but burning acid drops that hissed when they touched the soil. The air smelled of metal and ash, the kind of smell that warned anyone with sense to find shelter fast. Far out on the edge of the rocky plains, a human named Daniel struggled to keep his footing. His boots slid on the muddy ground, his coat already torn from the wind's claws. He knew storms on this alien world could kill in minutes, yet he was still far from the safety of the caves. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. Every flash of lightning showed the twisted landscape around him, jagged rocks, steaming puddles, and no sign of life. Then, through the curtain of rain, he saw something move. It was big, far bigger than any creature he had seen up close here. A shadow with wings collapsed in the mud, twitching weakly. Daniel's first thought was to turn away. Everyone knew about the alien dragons of this world. They were feared for their fire, their claws, and their strength. Stories told of entire villages burned to the ground in minutes. But this one didn't look dangerous. It looked dying. The dragon lay on its side, its once shining scales now dull and pale. Her wings were folded at strange angles, as if she had fallen from a great height. Steam rose from her body where the acid rain touched her skin. Her chest rose and fell in short, rapid breaths. Her golden eyes, half-lidded, followed Daniel as he approached. There was no growl, no roar, only a faint sound, like a low whimper. It was the sound of something in pain. Daniel hesitated, the storm screaming all around him. He had no reason to help. If the dragon died, it would be one less predator to fear. But something about the way she looked, helpless, alone, and close to death, made him stop walking away. He checked his small pack. Inside was a single glass vial of glowing blue medicine. It was rare, hard to find, and worth more than anything else he carried. He had kept it for himself, in case sickness or injury left him too weak to survive. Giving it away could mean losing his own life later. But watching her, struggling to even lift her head, he felt the weight of the decision pressing on his chest. Another flash of lightning lit the sky. Daniel saw the dragon's scales shimmer weakly in the light. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes closing again. If he didn't act now, she wouldn't survive the hour. He took a step forward, then another. The rain burned his hands as he knelt beside her head. Her pupils widened slightly as she looked at him, not in fear, but in confusion, as if she couldn't understand why he was there. Daniel uncorked the vial, the sharp smell of the medicine mixing with the storm's metallic air. He tilted it toward her mouth. For a moment she resisted, her jaw tightening, but then, as another wave of pain made her body shudder, she let the liquid slide past her teeth. She swallowed slowly, her throat moving with effort. Her eyes closed, and her breathing eased just a little. Daniel stepped back, unsure if it would work. The wind roared again, almost knocking him over. He had done all he could. Now it was in her hands, or rather, her wings. The storm showed no mercy. Daniel dragged himself to a cracked rock formation nearby, using it as a weak shield from the rain. He kept his eyes on the dragon, watching her chest rise and fall. Time passed in strange, stretched moments. Each second felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. Finally, exhaustion took him, and he closed his eyes, the sound of the storm fading into darkness. When he awoke, the air was still. The storm had passed, leaving the land wet and steaming. The acid rain had carved deep lines in the ground. Daniel pushed himself up, his muscles aching. He turned to look at the place where the dragon had been. She was gone. Only deep claw marks in the mud remained, leading away into the hills. He didn't know if she had flown away, crawled off to die, or simply disappeared into the mist. But the silence she left behind felt heavier than the storm itself. The morning after the storm, Daniel's body still ached from the cold and the long night. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint hiss of steam rising from the wet ground. He sat under the cracked rock ledge, staring at the spot where the alien dragon had been. The claw marks in the mud looked fresh, deep and uneven, as if she had struggled to move. A part of him expected to see her body lying somewhere nearby. But there was nothing, only silence. Daniel shook his head and tried to focus on his own survival. He had little food left, only a few dried strips of meat and stale bread. His water pouch was half empty, and the nearest settlement was at least a 2-day walk. He checked his gear, a small knife, a thermal blanket, a signal flare that might not even work after the storm's beating. He also noticed the empty space in his pack where the vial of medicine had been. It was strange, he felt no regret about giving it to her. Yet the thought of what he had given up stayed in the back of his mind. That medicine could have saved his own life if sickness came. He thought about the way she had looked at him, those golden eyes, tired but alert, almost questioning him. Why had he helped her, when she could have killed him with a single strike? He didn't know the answer himself. Maybe it was because she hadn't looked like a monster in that moment. She had looked lost. As the day passed, the cold wind cut deeper into his skin. The storm had left the land scarred. Pools of acid water bubbled in low places, and the ground crumbled under his boots. Daniel wrapped his coat tighter and began to walk. His goal was simple: reach higher ground and find shelter before the next storm rolled in. But every few steps he found himself glancing over his shoulder. Part of him wondered if she was watching him from somewhere. If she had survived, would she come back? Or would she remember him as nothing more than a strange human she met in her last moments? By midday, dark clouds began to gather again. The storms on this planet came fast, giving little warning. Daniel quickened his pace. He found a shallow cave in the side of a hill and crawled inside, the sound of the wind already starting to rise outside. The cave was cold but dry, with enough space to sit and stretch his legs. He set down his pack and pulled out his food, chewing slowly, forcing himself to eat even though his stomach felt tight. Survival meant keeping his strength up, no matter how much he wanted to save every last bite. As he sat in the dim light of the cave, his mind kept returning to that moment in the storm. The rain burning his skin, the dragon's heavy breathing, the feel of the vial in his hand. It had been a choice between his own safety and the life of a creature that might never thank him. And yet, when the time came, there had been no real choice at all. He had acted before his mind could tell him to stop. That night, the wind screamed outside the cave. Daniel lay on the cold ground, wrapped in his blanket. Every sound made him tense, the scratch of rock shifting, the distant howl of a predator carried on the wind. He kept his knife within reach, but nothing came, and eventually, exhaustion pulled him into sleep. He dreamed of wings, not the sight of them falling, as he had seen in the storm, but of them rising. Strong and powerful against the wind, the golden eyes looked at him again, but this time they were bright, alive, and full of something he couldn't name. When he woke, the dream stayed with him, making the cave feel smaller somehow. The next day, the air was clear and sharp. Daniel stepped out into the light, blinking at the strange beauty of the landscape after the storm. The jagged rock shone with a thin layer of ice where the rain had cooled too fast. Far away, he could see the mountains that marked the edge of his path. It would take him days to cross them, but beyond them was safety, or at least, that's what he told himself. As he walked, he kept replaying his decision in his head. He wondered if she had survived the night after he gave her the medicine. He wondered if she had felt the warmth of it spreading through her, the way it could push back sickness and pain. If she had, then maybe she was still alive somewhere out there, and maybe, just maybe, he would see her again. But the world had its own plans. Out here, survival was never promised, and Daniel knew that every step forward was just another gamble against the storms, the predators, and the endless silence that could swallow a man whole. The dragon landed on a wide, flat rock ledge high in the mountains. The wind here was strong but clean, carrying the sharp scent of snow from the peaks above. Daniel climbed down from her back, His legs unsteady from the flight, she folded her wings slowly, the tips scraping lightly against the rock as she settled. For a moment, they both stood in silence, the sound of the wind the only thing between them. Daniel dropped his pack and pulled out the bundle she had given him earlier. He unwrapped the leaves carefully, revealing the fresh meat and the warm crystals. The smell of the meat was rich, making his stomach tighten with hunger. He looked up at her, half expecting her to take it back, but she didn't move toward it. Instead, she lowered her head and pushed it slightly closer to him with the tip of her nose. It was a gesture so clear that words weren't needed. It was for him. He tore off a piece and chewed slowly, savoring the taste. The warmth spread through his body, easing the stiffness in his muscles. As he ate, the dragon simply watched, her golden eyes steady and calm. He realized she was making sure he ate enough before she would relax. That small act made something shift in his chest. In a place where every creature fought for its own survival, she was watching out for his. When he finished, he took one of the glowing crystals in his hands. The heat it gave off was gentle but steady. It would be enough to keep the cold away during the night. He placed it beside him and leaned back against the rock. The dragon moved closer, her body casting a shadow. Over him, she lay down with her front claws crossed, her head resting on them. Her wings curled slightly around her sides, like a wall between him and the wind. Daniel looked at her scales, now clean and bright. The deep metallic colors shifted when she moved, catching the light like liquid metal. It was hard to believe. This was the same creature he had found half buried in mud and rain. The medicine had saved her, but her strength now came from more than that. It came from survival, from the will to live, and maybe from something else. Something she had found in him. The day passed quietly. Daniel used the time to clean his gear, sharpen his knife, and drink from the water she had brought. Every so often, she would lift her head and scan the horizon, her ears twitching at distant sounds. He understood now that she wasn't just staying with him by accident. She was guarding him. Her presence was a warning to anything that might try to get close. Even without her fire or claws, her size alone was enough to keep danger away. As the sun began to set, the sky turned a deep orange and purple. The air grew colder, the wind sharper. Daniel pulled his coat tighter, but before the chill could sink in, the dragon shifted closer. Her body radiated heat, and the warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. He didn't know if she was doing it on purpose, or if it was simply how she rested. Either way, it kept the cold at bay. When night fully fell, stars scattered across the dark sky. From up here in the mountains, they looked sharper and brighter than anywhere else he had seen. Daniel lay back, staring at them. He thought about how strange it was to be here, a human on a world far from home, sitting beside a creature most people feared, yet he felt safer here, with her, than he had in many of the places built by his own kind. The dragon made a low, soft sound, almost like a purr. Daniel turned his head to look at her. Her eyes were half closed, but she was still awake. He reached out and placed his hand gently on her foreleg. The warmth of her scales and the steady rise and fall of her breathing made him feel connected. They didn't share a language, but they shared something deeper, a bond formed in the heart of a deadly storm. Through the night, she stayed close. Once, when he stirred in his sleep, he thought he heard her shift, as if checking. He was still there. It was a strange comfort, knowing she was near. In the morning, when the sun rose over the peaks, she was already awake, standing tall and scanning the valley below. Her tail swayed slowly, her wings flexing as if ready for flight at any moment. Daniel packed his things, slipping the crystals carefully into his bag. When he turned to her, she lowered herself again, inviting him onto her back without a sound. It was clear now, she had no intention of leaving him to walk alone. Whatever had begun in the storm was no longer a one-time act of kindness, it was a promise. And as he climbed onto her back and felt her muscles shift beneath him, Daniel understood something. She wasn't just a creature he had saved, she was his ally, his guardian, And maybe, in her eyes, he was the same to her. The morning air was sharp and cold. Carrying the bite of mountain wind that cut through even the thickest coat, Daniel sat on the dragon's back, holding onto the base of her neck as she leapt from the ledge. Her wings caught the rising air, lifting them higher until the valley below became a patchwork of stone, ice, and mist. From up here, the world looked quiet, peaceful even. But Daniel had been on this planet long enough to know that appearances were often lies. They flew for hours, the mountains passing beneath them like slow-moving shadows. The dragon's flight was smooth and steady, but her head kept turning slightly, her golden eyes scanning the land far below. Daniel noticed it. She was searching for something, or maybe for someone. He didn't ask, but he tightened his grip just in case. By midday, they landed in a rocky hollow surrounded by jagged cliffs. It was the perfect place to rest, hidden from view. Daniel unpacked the food she had given him earlier and began to eat. The dragon stood near the entrance, her wings half open, the spines along her back twitching. She was alert, more alert than usual. Daniel felt it too, a heaviness in the air, a tension that didn't belong to the wind or the mountains. He tried to push the feeling aside, but as the shadows lengthened, it only grew stronger. The cliffs echoed with faint, distant sounds, soft clicks, scraping noises, and something that could have been footsteps. Daniel stopped eating. The dragon turned her head sharply, her pupils narrowing. She made a low sound, deep in her throat, a sound that made the hairs on his neck stand up. Night came faster in the mountains, the light draining from the sky until only the pale glow of the crystals lit their camp. Daniel lay against the rock wall, the crystals warming his side. The dragon stayed awake, her gaze fixed on the dark beyond the hollow. Every few minutes she shifted her weight, her claws scraping lightly against stone. She was restless, and that made him restless too. Then it happened. A faint glimmer in the darkness, not the light of stars, but the reflection of eyes. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. They were low to the ground, moving slowly, circling. The dragon's head lifted higher, her wings flaring slightly as she let out a warning growl. The eyes didn't retreat, instead more appeared, blinking in and out of view as their owners crept closer. Daniel reached for his knife, his heart pounding. He knew he wouldn't be much help against whatever was out there, but he wasn't going to just sit and watch. The dragon stepped forward, placing herself between him and the darkness. Her tail swept the ground once, slow and deliberate. Then, without warning, she roared. The sound shook the hollow, a deep, powerful call that echoed off the cliffs and into the valley beyond. The eyes vanished instantly, swallowed by the dark, but the dragon didn't relax. She stood there for a long time, scanning every shadow, every movement of the wind-blown rocks. Daniel stayed close, his grip on the knife tight, even though the danger seemed to have passed. When the night grew quiet again, the dragon finally lowered her head. She moved back toward him, her gaze softening. He understood then that she had been protecting him more than herself. Whatever had been out there hadn't just been hunting for food. It had been hunting them, and without her, he would have never even known until it was too late. Sleep came in short bursts for Daniel. Every sound woke him, the shift of gravel, the whistle of wind, the distant crack of stone. But the dragon never left her post, even as dawn began to turn the sky pale. She was still there. When she finally turned to him, the first light of day caught her eyes, making them shine like molten gold. They left the hollow quickly, the dragon launching into the air without hesitation. Daniel felt the power in her wings, each beat taking them higher and farther from the cliffs. The wind was cold, but it carried a strange relief with it. They were safe, for now. But Daniel knew the danger wasn't gone. It was still out there, somewhere in the shadows of this harsh world, waiting, and now it would be looking for them again. The storm had passed, but its memory clung to the land like a shadow that refused to fade. Daniel walked slowly through the valley, his boots sinking into the soft, wet ground. The air was still, almost too still, and it felt strange after the roar of wind and thunder. Here and there, the ground hissed where acid rain had pooled, sending up thin streams of steam. The sky was pale now, heavy with clouds that seemed tired after their rage. He kept looking for any sign of the dragon. Her claw marks were still fresh in the mud, leading toward the hills, but they were uneven. And he could tell she had been weak when she left. Part of him wanted to follow, but the thought of chasing her into unknown territory without food or shelter was foolish. Still, the emptiness she left behind pressed on him like a weight. It was strange how much space she seemed to take in his thoughts after such a short time. Daniel spent most of the day walking toward the higher ground, where the rocks might offer better shelter. His legs felt heavy, his throat dry, and his supplies were running low. He tried not to think about how many days it would take to reach the settlement. Each step was measured, careful, and slow. The land here was dangerous, not just because of storms, but because of what lived in the cracks and shadows. By midday, the wind picked up again. It wasn't the deadly howl of a full storm, but enough to make the rocks whistle and the dry plants sway. Daniel pulled his coat tighter. Every sound seemed louder in the silence. The crunch of his boots, the scrape of stone, the soft drip of water from jagged edges above. He couldn't help but glance over his shoulder now and then. The land was open, and anyone or anything watching him would see him long before he saw them. When the sun dipped lower, he found a ledge deep enough to serve as a temporary camp. It smelled of damp stone, but at least it was dry. He sat down and took out the last piece of dried meat from his pack, chewing slowly to make it last. The flavor was faint, almost gone, but it kept his stomach from aching. He wished he had saved more food, but the storm had taken much of his supplies when he had been forced to run. As darkness crept in, Daniel lit a small fire from the dry sticks he had gathered along the way. The flames flickered against the rock, casting long shadows on the walls. He stared into them, his mind drifting back to the dragon's eyes. Golden, tired, but alive, he wondered if she had found safety, or if she was lying somewhere in the hills, her breathing slowing until there was nothing left. The thought made his chest feel tight in a way he didn't like. That night, the valley was quiet. Too quiet. No distant roars, no movement in the dark. Only the soft whisper of the wind brushing against stone. Daniel lay awake for a long time, listening. In a place like this, silence could be as dangerous as noise. It could mean predators were near, moving without sound. It could mean the land itself was holding its breath before something happened. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and filled with strange dreams. He saw the dragon again, but this time she was not lying in the mud. She was standing tall, her wings spread wide, her scales bright as fire under sunlight. She looked at him with the same golden eyes, but now there was strength in them. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. The image burned in his mind as he woke in the early hours. The fire reduced to glowing embers. The next day began without warning, the sun slipping through the clouds just enough to light the land. Daniel stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles. He kicked dirt over the fire and packed his things. The path ahead would take him closer to the mountains. It was a hard journey, but every step would bring him closer to safety. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone might be following him. As he walked, his eyes scanned the horizon. He saw the tracks of smaller creatures, the marks of claws and paws in the mud. But no sign of large wings, no deep prints like hers. The hills ahead looked calm, but in this world, calm could break at any moment. Daniel tightened the straps on his pack and kept going. His mind told him the dragon was gone for good, but his gut whispered another story, and in a land like this, gut feelings were rarely wrong. 3 days passed without sight of the dragon. Daniel's journey had been slow, his body worn down by hunger and the constant chill in the air. The mountains were closer now, but each step toward them felt heavier. The nights were the hardest, long hours of cold and silence. He kept a small fire when he could, but fuel was scarce. The little food he had left was gone, and every morning he woke with his stomach aching. The sky above was a dull gray, heavy. With the promise of another storm, Daniel watched the clouds as he walked. Here, storms didn't come with gentle warnings. They arrived like an ambush. Fierce and sudden, the wind was already starting to pick up. It whistled through the rocks. In low, haunting tones, he pulled his coat tighter, knowing that if the storm came fast, there might be no shelter nearby. The land ahead was open. A wide stretch of cracked stone and scattered pools of acid water. Daniel kept moving, his boots leaving shallow prints in the damp earth. His eyes scanned the horizon. Something felt different. It wasn't just the wind. It was the way the air seemed to tremble, as if something massive was moving far above. Then he heard it, a deep rolling sound, not thunder, not wind, but something alive. His head snapped up. Searching the sky, at first, there was nothing but shifting clouds. Then, a shadow moved across the light. Large, fast, and unmistakable wings. Massive wings slicing through the air, their tips catching the faint light. Daniel froze where he stood. The shape dropped lower, cutting through the mist like a blade. A familiar silhouette. Long tail, wide wings, and a body that glimmered with shifting colors. It was her, the alien dragon. But she was not the same as when he last saw her. Her scales shone with a deep, metallic glow, each one catching light like polished armor. Her flight was strong, steady, her movements sharp with power. She descended quickly, the wind from her wings sweeping over him in a powerful rush. Daniel stumbled back a step as she landed only a few meters away. Her claws dug into the earth, her golden eyes fixed on him. There was no weakness in them now, no pain, no struggle, only strength, and something else, something he couldn't name. In her claws, she carried something. With a low rumble in her chest, she set it down in front of him. It was a bundle made from strange woven fibers. Inside, he saw food, fresh meat wrapped in thick leaves, a pouch of clean water, and several glowing crystals that gave off gentle warmth. He stared at it, then at her, unsure what to say. She lowered her head slightly, her gaze steady. It was almost like a bow. Daniel stepped forward slowly. He could feel the heat from her body, even from a few steps away. The storm clouds above rumbled, but for the moment, the air around them felt still. He crouched beside the bundle, running his fingers over the smooth crystals. They were warm enough to fight off the night's chill. When he looked back at her, she was watching him with unblinking eyes. Her breathing was steady, calm. It was clear she had come here for him. A part of him couldn't believe it. On this world, survival was harsh. Every creature fought for its own life. Kindness was rare, and gifts were almost unheard of. Yet here she was, returning to the one who had helped her when she had been too weak to stand. He remembered the way she had swallowed the medicine in the storm. He remembered thinking he might never see her again. And now she stood here, stronger than ever, offering him what he needed most. Daniel placed a hand on one of her front claws. The scales were smooth, warm and solid under his touch. She didn't pull away. Her head lowered just enough for him to meet her eyes without tilting his head back. He didn't speak. There were no words that felt right. But in that moment, something passed between them, a silent understanding. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of rain. Daniel knew the storm was coming fast. He gathered the bundle into his pack and looked around for shelter. Before he could move, the dragon turned, her wings unfolding in a slow, powerful motion. She glanced back at him once, then crouched low. It was an invitation. Daniel hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward and climbing onto her back. Her scales were slick but firm under his hands. When her wings beat the air, the ground fell away beneath them. They rose above the cracked land, the wind rushing past. The mountains loomed ahead, closer than they had ever seen from the ground. Below, the storm swept across the valley, chasing them but never quite catching. Daniel held tight, feeling the deep, steady rhythm of her body as she carried them forward. It was a feeling unlike anything he had known, not just flight, But trust, for the first time since the storm that had nearly taken them both, Daniel felt a spark of hope, and high above the broken land, with the wind in his face and the dragon's strength beneath him, he knew their story was only just beginning. The flight from the mountains felt different this time. Daniel sat on the dragon's back, the wind rushing past his face. Below them, the land stretched for miles, valleys, rivers, and plains that shimmered under the pale morning sun. The danger of the night still lingered in his mind, but with each wing beat, the tension in his chest slowly eased. He was riding not just a creature of power, but an ally who had chosen to protect him. As they flew lower, he began to see signs of human settlement. Smoke rising from small fires, fields carved into the earth, figures moving far below. It had been days since he'd seen his own kind. The thought of returning with her at his side sent a ripple of uncertainty through him. He didn't know how people would react to her, fear, awe, or anger, but she didn't seem concerned. Her golden eyes stayed fixed ahead, her flight steady. When they finally reached the outer edges of the settlement, the reaction was immediate. People stopped what they were doing. Some froze in place, others ran, children pointed and shouted, their voices carrying a mix of excitement and fear. The dragon circled once above the open field before descending. Her wings spread wide, kicking up a swirl of dust and loose grass as she landed. Daniel climbed down, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The air was filled with murmurs, questions, disbelief, and cautious whispers. He could feel every pair of eyes on him. Some held suspicion, others curiosity. The dragon stayed behind him, her head lowered but her body upright, her presence impossible to ignore. A few men approached, their hands hovering near their tools and weapons. Daniel raised a hand, his voice calm. "She's not here to hurt anyone," he said. "She's with me." The words felt strange but right. He explained briefly how he had found her in the storm, how she had been sick and dying, how he had given her his only medicine, and how she had returned, stronger than before. Some listened, their expressions softening, others still kept their distance. The dragon made a low sound, not a growl, but something closer to a greeting. It rolled through the air, deep and steady. The children were the first to move closer, their small steps cautious but brave. One of them reached out a hand, and the dragon lowered her head just enough for tiny fingers to brush against her scales. The child's face lit up, and a ripple of laughter broke the tension. Daniel felt something settle inside him in that moment. This was more than survival. Now this was trust being built between worlds. The dragon stepped forward, not to intimidate, but to offer the bundle of crystals and food she still carried. She set them down gently in front of the settlement's elders, who looked at each other in surprise. It was a gift, and even without words, everyone understood it. The day passed in a blur of questions, careful introductions, and shared food. Daniel stayed near the dragon, translating her actions into meaning for those who didn't understand. He could see the way people's fear shifted into respect. By evening, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. Daniel stood at the edge of the settlement with her beside him, watching the light fade. He thought back to the storm, the way she had fallen, broken and weak, the moment he had chosen to help. Neither of them could have known it would lead here, but now she stood tall and strong, her wings ready, her eyes alive with energy. She was no longer the creature he had saved. She was his partner, his protector, his proof that kindness could cross even the widest divide. When night came, she didn't leave. Instead, she settled near the edge of the settlement, her massive body curled protectively as Daniel rested by the fire. The people had begun to accept her, but it was clear she would remain watchful. The wind carried the faint sound of distant storms. Daniel looked at her and knew they would face many more dangers together. But they would face them as one, and somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning of their story. A story that had started in a deadly storm, with a single choice to help. A story that had turned a dying dragon into a friend and turned a lone human into something more than just a survivor. It had made them a team, one that would stand together, stronger than ever.